Hello everyone and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. Coming up today on the show, we'll return to the North Central Research Station at Lahoma to wrap up this year's wheat field tour. But first, we want to talk about some of the finances involved in running a cattle operation. We're joined with Dave Lallman here in the pasture, our extension beef cattle specialist. And Dave, you have some data in hand that you've been analyzing. What are you looking at?
Cost to run a beef cow. On SUNUP in the past, we've sort of given folks an update on what we think the average cost to run a beef cow is in Oklahoma. The Kansas Farm Management Association has an actual data set of farms and ranches costs, and so I thought I might just share their results from last year.
Okay, what are some of the categories, areas that jump out at you?
Okay, first of all, there's in this data set from the Kansas Farm Management Association, there's 90 cow-calf operations that contributed to the data. Their average weaning weight in those operations was 581 pounds. So Oklahoma producers can look at their weaning weights and see how they compare. Now these would be 2015 values, so weaning weights from last year. The total cost to run a cow last year, according to this data, now that includes all variable costs, fixed costs, interest, labor return to management, and so on, was $1,191 per head, which is considerably higher than it was the last 5 years, 5-year average.
What does this research tell you about feed cost and pasture cost?
They've gone up. They're compared to the previous 5-year average in the Kansas data set. This last year, just non-pasture feed costs were about $360 per cow. The previous 5 years, that number was right at $300. So that's gone up $60. Well, you know, it's compared to that 5-year average. So obviously back in 2010, it was probably lower than it was in 2014. The pasture costs, Lyndall, were $214 per cow last year in Kansas in this data set. Compared to $161 the previous 5. So it had gone up about $40 per cow.
Like a lot of things, it's just getting more expensive.
Yes, exactly.
Let's look at variable versus fixed costs and kind of how some of those compare and in fact what they are.
Sure. So the total was $1,191. Of that, $885 are variable costs, which of course is your veterinary, pasture, feed, and so on. The fixed costs, which include depreciation, real estate, unpaid operator labor, and other interest charge, is about $358 of that $1,191.
Okay, and then as you look at the last 5 years as a whole, what kind of things really jump out at you?
Well, almost every category has gone up substantially. Now, you know, a pretty good chunk of that increase, when we said the increase was from, I think we said from 935 to 1191. Okay, so that's the total increase. But almost every category, we said the pasture category, the feed category, the veterinary bill increased some, the interest amount increased some because land prices are more expensive than they used to be, and so on. So most every category has gone up. It's not necessarily any one real obvious area that stands out contributing to those increased costs.
So as a producer who's managing cattle operation with this kind of information in mind, what do I need to do to continue to make progress toward profitability?
Well, that's a really interesting point and question. First of all, it's good to have detailed data like this, and Dr. Doy would tell you that, you know, your viewers need to be using, or she'd encourage them to use, their enterprise budgets there at OSU so they can come up with their own values and maybe compare it to a data set like this. The other encouraging thing that maybe we can talk about in another segment is that a good number, about a third of these operations are very profitable. Another third are consistently not very profitable. But you know, if you don't know what your costs are and where your more important costs are, opportunities to reduce costs and so on, it's pretty hard to make progress.
It is. Okay, some great advice and information. Dave, thanks a lot. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
And for a link to some of those management tools that Dave mentioned, just go to sunup.okstate.edu.
One more stop at Lahoma. We're meeting up with Brian Ernell. And Brian, what are you telling producers today?
So at the stop, we're at a really neat demo looking at the nitrogen use efficiency of a couple of the lines. We're looking at one of the experimentals, 13625 versus Gallagher. The background story on this is for the last several years, been working with Dr. Carver down at Tipton on some evaluation of his lines under low nitrogen management. The nutrient management strategy has always been, don't let nutrients limit my genetics.
Okay.
So very few of the wheat lines that have ever come out of any of the institutions have been evaluated under poor nitrogen or poor nutrient management. And in this, he's really finding a lot of interesting things that are coming out. Lines that at Tipton with the low rainfall has done very well under drought, and also managed to maintain baking and milling qualities. And so in the near future, as the breeding program goes and the nutrient management program starts combining with them, he's maintaining his elite lines under or low nitrogen management, which down at Tipton is only 25 pounds of nitrogen.
Wow.
And then we're going to expand that and look at them under other environments across the range of nitrogen rates to see what they do under low, medium, and high nitrogen management. How well do they compete against our high-yielding cultivars? And are they maintaining that baking and milling quality, high standard of baking and milling quality across the range of environments?
Well, and this is a perfect time to start thinking about that, because the price of wheat is, you know, fluctuating kind of lower,
Yeah.
and you have those producers that say, is it worth putting the effort into the field if I'm not going to get a crop?
And so that's really one of the main points both myself and Dr. Anderson have been making, is that so the NUE work with the breeding program is definitely not to reduce the amount of nitrogen. In fact, that's probably greatly limiting our price that we're getting for the wheat, is the poor nitrogen management or low nitrogen management and poor baking milling qualities. What this goes into is we can maybe find some genetics so that we can maintain this higher yielding potential and optimize the nitrogen. One of the lines that we have out here at 13625 will actually go on large scale next year for organic production. Organic producers are going to grow 40 to 50 acres of this wheat for organic bread production.
Right.
So that means low input. The organic system can be low input if they aren't using animal manures. And so if we can have a organic wheat cultivar coming out of Oklahoma State that's great for baking and milling quality, it's a really good niche market for some of our producers.
So this crop's going to be done here in the next 3 weeks. What should producers be looking at as soon as the crop comes off?
So as soon as the crop comes off, soil sample.
Right.
If you've got historic soil samples and they come in at a marginal pH in that 5.5 range, really consider grid sampling. That's very important. I've got some great data that I'll share with the group later on about how our soils are varying across the state. 2, plan for enriched strips. This year, guys that have been running enriched strips for the last 8 years have been averaging about 1.2 pounds of N per bushel. This year, because of our environment, it took 2 pounds of N per bushel. It shows that nitrogen demand changes from year to year. Some years we need less, some years we need more. The strip is the only way we know that and to be economical. And lastly, let's start thinking outside the box. Last year I had a couple producers doing it. They're going on Craigslist about this time of the year and buying old grain drills that were sitting behind barns in the woods, in the Johnson grass, and using them to put down their pre-plant nitrogen urea source in no-till. They didn't want to use anhydrous. They don't want to work up that.
Right.
But getting nitrogen in the ground is so important.
Thank you much, Brian. Brian Arnell, soil nutrient specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
We're talking soil health now with Jason Warren. Jason, we're in a soil pit that you've dug in your research area. What is this showing and telling you when you look at the soil?
Well, this pit is dissecting a plot where we've been growing continuous wheat versus continuous wheat with a cover crop in the summer fallow period. And so we've cover cropped this field every summer except this one for 4 years, and then we fallowed it last winter to plant this milo crop. And so what I wanted to do was dig a pit and see what we could see. And one of the most evident things is on this side with the cover, you'll see a few more root, a little bit more root material on this side versus that side. And then if we look real close, we can see that this is underneath the residue particularly. It's very granular, it just breaks apart very readily. And a lot of guys, you know, well, let's look down into the pit, and yeah, you can see a little bit more root growth down here, about 8 inches, but most of what I see from my efforts to improve the soil condition is in this top 6 inches, or top 2 inches or so, and that's improved aggregate stability and essentially the protection of that soil surface against the harmful influences of rain beating down on it. Because like I say, it's nice and soft and granular, and it breaks apart real nice. And now this over here is in really good condition because this hasn't been tilled in 5 or 6 years, but it's a little more bare. It doesn't have quite as much root growth in it, and you do tend to get these larger aggregates that break apart, but they do still have a lot of evidence of biological activity in them. And lastly, I just point out, you know, we cover crop this in a continuous wheat and or wheat canola rotation and saw no benefit of having the cover crop on the wheat crop, whether it would be nitrogen improvements or weed suppression or disease or insects. But milo, we have had data from other locations where milo will positively respond to improvements in the soil's condition. And so that's why we fallowed it and are now growing milo, because in a hopes to pull the value that we see in this soil into the grain cart.
Is that the next stage of your research then?
Yeah, and again, we're searching to try to figure out some of the things that we're talking about with respect to soil health, because what our experience has been is if we can develop and maintain a nice profitable crop rotation in our no-till systems, we can really do amazing things, particularly with summer crops. We don't get a lot of yield benefit in our wheat, but for milo, you know, we can increase our milo yields from improving the soil character by, you know, 10, 20, 30% in some cases. And this is established research from Stillwater and Lahoma. And that's why we're trying to find out what these long-term or 4-year treatments have done to the soil, and now what it will do to the milo yields.
Impressive numbers, Jason. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Recently, a cow-calf producer emailed me a question about lameness of 1 or 2 of the cows in his herd, and in the description he discussed that the toes of one of the cows seemed to be growing inward to the point of even crossing one another. And that, of course, reminded me that there is a situation in cattle that I think requires some attention. It's a condition that we call corkscrew claw, or sometimes just shortened to screw claw. As you look at this particular photograph that's on the screen, you get an idea of a situation that has really gotten out of hand. And with this particular condition, it forces the weight of the animal to be on the outside of the hoof as they're walking, and therefore putting a lot of stress on the joints, usually in the hind legs, the hock joint and the stifle joint above that, and therefore the lameness occurs. Now, this particular condition can receive some treatment with the help of their local veterinarian. Proper trimming of that hoof can really help equalize that weight situation so that particular animal can go ahead and be productive for a few months. But I do think that we want to realize that there's a strong genetic component to this condition called screw claw. Research from one of the Corn Belt universities with dairy cattle noticed that there was certainly a higher incidence of screw claw in daughters of cows that had had the condition previously. Therefore, if you're shopping for replacement heifers, bulls, and certainly older cows, be very, very mindful of this condition. And certainly I would steer away from animals and purchasing animals that have anything that look like screw claw, because of the fact that we think there is a genetic component to it. And by the same token, then if we locate cattle in our own herd that perhaps have this condition, certainly I think we want to consider culling them and not keeping replacement heifers from them. Not all toe conditions are going to be genetic or like this situation of screw claw. Perhaps you'll have some cows with elongated toes due to what we might call founder. It's a situation nutritionally where they just got more energy than what their rumen could handle at the time. I would really suggest that if you have questions about cattle with elongated toes, misformed toes, visit with your local veterinarian. Let them help you understand what the condition might be so that you would cull those that need to be culled and perhaps just trim those that need to be trimmed, and they could go on to be healthy, productive animals in your herd. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next time on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Daryl Peel, our livestock marketing specialist, joins us now. Daryl, we had Memorial Weekend, the official, unofficial start of summer. Let's take a look at what the beef markets are looking like.
Well, you know, it'll be a few more days before we have a good feel for sort of what the movement of beef was over the weekend. There were some weather problems in some parts of the country. But if you back up behind that, you know, it really depends on supply and demand, as always. And so if we look back at the way the supply side of this market has evolved, we got an early start with some increase in beef production. It actually started in February and March. Feedlots were in the process of pulling cattle ahead, so they upped slaughter rates. Beef production was higher, and kind of sent an early challenge into the beef market. Through the month of April, wholesale beef prices dropped, and it appears that the movement was good. Retailers took advantage of those lower prices, booked a lot of meat. That should have shown up as some featuring opportunities during Memorial Day and probably beyond as we look ahead to June and Father's Day and some other grilling holidays coming up. So we kind of got a head start on the supply side. It looks like movement was good. We'll wait for kind of the rest of the verdict to come in here on how good Memorial Day weekend was.
Now, in terms of these sort of busy summer months, how is demand going to shape up, do you think?
Well, again, the grilling season obviously is a key to that, but early indications are that demand has been pretty good this year. If we go back and look at our calculated demand index for the first quarter of the year, it was actually equal to a year ago, not better than, but you have to recognize that we put about 4% more meat out in terms of domestic supply. So for demand to hold steady during that process is pretty good. Again, the indications are that beef is moving well. As we do lower these prices down, you know, then we'll continue to see demand develop, pricing opportunities. It appears that consumers are coming back to beef pretty readily as supplies increase and these prices do moderate a bit.
And then how are things shaping up moving forward?
Well, for the next month or so, we'll be still moving into seasonally the largest production of the year in terms of slaughter. The things we've done before this really set that up well. One of the great things that happened as cattle were pulled forward in February and March and somewhat in April is we've pulled carcass weights down dramatically. So even though we've got more cattle numbers coming at us, even in the second half of the year, cattle slaughter will be bigger year over year, but the weights will moderate that somewhat. And so the challenges will be there. The general tendency will be for lower prices, but we've done a lot of good things in the last couple of months to really set ourselves up to handle that well.
Okay, Daryl Peel, thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. We're talking about wheat bran and wheat germ today here at the Food and Ag Products Center with Nurhan Dunford. And Nurhan, let's just start. Why are wheat bran and germ separated out from whole grain during flour production?
Let's start with the grain structure. I think it's important to understand why it's important to remove germ and bran. If you look at the kernel or wheat kernel, there are two parts to it: a germ and endosperm. Endosperm is the flour, which contains starch and proteins. Both of these fractions are enclosed in a seed coat, which is called bran. Bran fraction actually protects the grain from environmental damage. The ultimate goal of wheat milling is to produce a white flour with minimum bran and germ contamination. Bran is not desirable in the flour because it has this tough texture and also darker color. Germ is not good in flour because germ contains significant amount of oil, and oil in the flour could get oxidized and produce rancid flour flavors. Because of those reasons, both germ and bran are separated from the flour during the milling process.
We hear about germ and bran, though, having some health benefits. Describe that for us.
Exactly. Actually, most of the nutritional components of wheat are concentrated in bran and germ fractions. Bran mostly contains fiber. We know that fiber is very good for gut health and also digestive system health. And when we ingest fiber, fiber absorbs moisture in the stomach and swells, and that contributes to the satiety. So bran intake is a good way of controlling body weight. Also, both bran and germ contain antioxidants, which have a number of health benefits. And wheat germ is rich in high quality protein. There are scientific studies indicating that wheat germ protein actually promotes muscle buildup and repair.
Okay, plus helps you feel full, as you mentioned. You mentioned the oil, and you have a sample here for us. Where does the oil play in? What does that involve? Wheat germ
may contain up to 20% oil. And wheat germ oil is the richest natural source of vitamin E. So it's a very healthy oil.
Okay, it's nice to see just how far these little grains can go.
And it's also very important for our state, right? We produce a lot of wheat, and these byproducts can be used in high-value nutritional products.
Okay, Nurhan, thanks a lot.
Well, it's that time of the show again where we talk to Kim Anderson. And Kim, I've always wanted to ask, is there a show on the other side of the world where there's an interviewer asking a grain marketing specialist about the U.S. wheat crop and how they're hoping that it may fail?
I'm sure it's not as good as SUNUP is, but I would suspect that there are marketing analysts and people around the globe that are wanting crops to fail somewhere else besides their location. Because for prices to go up, someone has to lose a crop, or several, quote, countries have to lose a crop, and you always want it to be somebody else rather than you. So yes, they do. And we do need a crop to fail so that we can get higher prices, and producers around the world will benefit from it, because right now prices are below the cost of production for most areas.
Okay, that leads me into the next question. Is there that country that's going to fail a wheat crop?
Well, right now we don't see that. You look at the news over the last couple of weeks, Russia record grain crop, Russia wheat production up, Ukraine 20% less planted acres we were talking about last fall. What are we talking about now? Perfect weather, great yields, big crop for Ukraine. Just came out this week, Australia's crop's looking really good. The news around the world is for better crops than we expected a month or two ago.
Where's that inconsistency in the numbers? Because, you know, earlier you were saying countries had this much planted acres and now all of a sudden there's more.
Well, the planted acres are there. It's just weather. You know, we can talk about policy, we can talk about other inputs and stuff, but weather determines production, and and production determines price. So the inconsistency is most of the time, it's been my observation that good crops are we tend to overestimate them, and poor crops we tend to underestimate. So I think hopefully the salvation is this big 26.7 billion bushel crop, which I think WASDE will increase when this June report comes out this next week. I think it's probably going to be less than we expect right now because we have a tendency to overestimate. But the weather is the one to determine whether we're right or wrong.
Okay, so all that's great, but what does that mean for the Oklahoma wheat producer when it comes to price?
Well, right now I think the good news, because the last couple of weeks and really the last month or so, all the news has been good for production, both in the United States and around the world. Our price has held relatively steady. I think we've found the floor. I can't see, you know, prices could drop if we get harvest pressure, real big harvest pressure in, we could drop 50 cents off this price. I don't think we will. I think we could lose 10 or 20 cents, something like that. But the market's telling me right now that prices are going to go slightly higher. Not much. I think we're going to stay in this sideways pattern, but I think we're looking at, as we get out into the September, October, November time period, slightly higher prices.
So all of that, does the world need the wheat now, or do they need it later down the road?
Well, the market's telling us they need it down the road, because you look at that KC July contract, you look at the KC December contract, that December contract is 40 cents higher than the July contract. The market's telling us, I don't want it now, I want it later down the road, December, March, May, July of next year even. They're saying, I don't want it now, and I'm willing to pay the market to store that wheat, or I'm willing to pay you and show you a higher price down the road, that higher price, so that you will store the wheat rather than selling it now.
Okay, thank you much, Kim, grain marketing specialist here at Oklahoma State University. And that does it for this week on SUNUP. If there's something that you saw on the show that you'd like to learn more about, visit our website, sunup.okstate.edu. Otherwise, we'll see you next week at SUNUP.